So let's start with why this matters, which might seem fairly obvious because this is pretty relevant to what we do every day, all day. But essentially, the important, we want to respect copyright. It's the foundation of our industry. It's how artists' work is protected. That's what we do. So that's, certainly a really big one. Preventing misuse, any of us from agencies that have license terms, we have those terms in place for a reason. We expect them to be followed. Obtaining compensation, again, somewhat obvious. We're talking about licensing uh, as a product. So that's an important element. And then I think an easy to overlook but very important piece is education. There is an opportunity when enforcing copyright to educate whoever has infringed or misused and try to help prevent that from happening in the future. Go to the next slide, Paul. This is, again, as Paul said, we're doing a full roundtable tomorrow on copyright enforcement do's and don'ts. So this is going to be a very, very quick overview of those pieces. Essentially, my preferred first step in these situations is always communication. There are certainly bad actors out there who are, misusing copyright protected materials with, nefarious intent. There's also a lot of misunderstandings and mistakes that are made. For me as representative of an agency, I want to transfer misuse and infringement into license purchases and build a relationship there. So that's where I tend to start. I think it's a good place. There are certainly also a lot of copyright enforcement services. There are a number of them that are members of DMLA. These organizations can provide a level of expertise and scalability that an individual just doesn't have, and that an agency may not have bandwidth for. We do have a set of DMLA best practices for copyright enforcement services, which we will share out the link for that, but that's a really good thing to take a look at if you are deciding you want to go with an enforcement service or looking to do that sort of work yourself. And then, of course, legal claims, the bedrock of a lot of what we're talking about. Copyright infringement is a federal case. These are not simple. These are not inexpensive or short cases generally. There are times that it is absolutely worth doing that and going through that litigation, but just know that it is not cheap or quick. We also have the new small claims coming, and that is, thanks, Paul's reading my mind and I'm a step behind. Small claims court is also now, under the Case Act, a thing. There's an entire panel tomorrow with updates on that, so we won't get too into it today. Now, next slide. Thank you. There are some really practical complexities in copyright enforcement that we need to just keep in mind, and I'm going to run through these again. These are complex. There's a lot to talk about. I'm just going to give you a really quick overview. So the nature of our products as digital products, we work in a world that is all about content sharing, which means there is a proliferation of digital files out there. Even the most fastidious copyright enforcement practice may not be able to get them all. And that's just sort of the nature of the internet, unfortunately. Exclusivity, distribution, and end use. If you have exclusive content and you're looking to enforce copyright, that's pretty straightforward. If you have non-exclusive content, which is a lot of royalty-free content and a lot of distributed content that we all work in and with, that's going to be a lot harder because you're going to have the potential for multiple different licensors and different terms and all of that. So it's something you need to be able to trace, and it's certainly more complex if you're talking about non-exclusive content. Also, just being aware that, if you have an agency buying on behalf of a client and an end user, you may not know who that end user is. So I know in my experience at Stocksy, if we don't always have that information, you have to just go with what you've got and base it from there. So there is some limitation in terms of finding those end users. And then copyright registration. My confession, I am both an artist and a lawyer, and I have not registered my own work. So that should tell you some of the challenges in copyright registration. It is necessary. if you want to bring an infringement suit. There is some interesting developments within the small claims space with that respect to that, and I suspect that Nancy will make sure those are covered tomorrow on that panel. You can go ahead to the next one, Paul. This is my quick, boring legal. Here's what you should do to prepare for any sort of enforcement case, claim, discussion. You want to collect all the information. So it's contact information, dates of license, dates of when you found things in misuse, whatever applicable license terms, registration information, or that you don't have it, and then collect any evidence, screenshots, communications, etc.
Hey, Margaret, can I just chime in? Actually, I don't think this is boring. I think this is actually important. It's important because it makes your claims go faster. So it saves both sides a lot of headaches. So the better prepared you are, the more you take the time up front to do this, means you'll have a more productive conversation. You'll get to quicker resolution.
Very true.
So I know you said boring tongue in cheek.
No, and you're right. It's my endless telling people to document everything. Yeah. But it is, and if you're talking about a service or something that's costing you any amount to use, the more prepared you are, the more efficient that will be, both financially and time-wise. So that is important. Thank you. I'm so used to putting down these sorts of things. All right, go ahead to the next one, Paul. Just a couple other things I think that are worth thinking about. Try to think about info gathering before accusation. Again, there are nefarious actors. There are also a lot of harmless intent mistakes. So I think getting all that information before you sort of feel the outrage of having your work misused or stolen, I understand it, but it's worth getting that information. Be aware of the impacts of the industry. We are, as we all know, a very unique collection of entities, and especially where we have that distribution and non-exclusive work. The choices you make in enforcement can have impacts on the industry and your competitor colleagues as a whole. And then I would recommend reviewing DMLA's best practices for copyright enforcement services. While some of them are going to be specific to those services, a lot of the information there is just generally useful in copyright enforcement and how to go about it. Next slide. And again, as I said, these are the two panels that are tomorrow. They are back to back. The Case Act update, I should mention, these times are central because that's where I am, but check your schedules. But the Case Act update with Nancy and Keith from the Copyright Alliance and others, and then do's and don'ts of copyright enforcement with some other lawyers and service folks. And I think it'll be a really good way to dig into these topics more deeply. And with that, I will hand it back.
Great. Thanks, Margaret. That was great.